Some good news came out of the NHL tonight. And even though I'm in the small minority when it comes to this, but not only did the NHL have its moment, but finally something that we could wrap our arms around with maybe a slight bit of controversy, but let's face it, with the way the NHL is being played here in 2020, 2021, it is a far cry from what we once saw 30 years ago. But I'll save that for later. If you haven't been paying attention, in the NHL over the last 48 hours, you had an incident at the Garden on Monday night where Capitals' Tom Wilson was handed down a $5,000 fine for his actions in the game where he smashed Pavel Buchnevich's head, or really just took a punch at him. Even though just a few minutes later, Artemi Panarin was a guy who was on the brunt of another Tom Wilson punch or push to the ice, whatever you want to call it. And the Rangers were in an uproar because they thought a suspension should have been handed down, considering the reputation of one Tom Wilson. We know he received a 7-game suspension earlier this year for a hit on Brandon Carlo, which I got on this case for, and I got on the league and everything in reference to Tom Wilson and a guy like he, which I'm going to get to also. I'm going to break all this down for you people. So without further ado, so the Rangers were upset where they had to release a statement yesterday saying that they didn't understand why Wilson wasn't suspended due to the horrifying act of violence on the ice there Monday night. Horrifying? Horrifying. As if Tom Wilson skated up to Buchnevich, turned around, and just punched him. Knocked him out cold. You know, this wasn't, to use an NBA reference, Rudy Tomjanovich, Kermit Washington. Or we'll keep it in NHL vernacular. This wasn't Todd Bertuzzi mauling that kid from, Colorado many years ago. So for the Rangers to come out with a statement like that was just over the top and was really unnecessary. I understand they're trying to stick up for their team and their players, but please give me a break. So now let's fast forward to today where John Davidson, the president of the Rangers, and Jeff Gorton, the GM, were both let go. Now, of course, they're not looking at the statement as the reason why they were released. And now, for a change, Jim Dolan's going to get some blame for this, where he usually gets blamed for everything that happens with the Knicks. Now, it looks like he has some blood on his hands when it comes to the Rangers. But with that being said, 1 second into the game tonight, you had both teams getting ready to drop the puck to start the game. And right after the puck was dropped, you had 6 sets of gloves on the ice where everybody was pretty much paired off except for the defenseman. And you had a Donnybrook that was similar to the Devils and Rangers. It made me think back to the 2012 season where you had Cam Jansen, Brandon Preston. I'm going to get to him in a second. Mike Rupp. The famous fight to start the game with John Tortorella as coach of the Rangers and Peter DeBoer, coach of the Devils, no love lost. But anyway, so you had that to start, and then just 49 seconds later, you had Brandon Smith, who's not going to be confused with Colton Orr. Let me throw that out there. And that's not to knock Smith by any stretch. But he going after Tom Wilson, they scrapped. Now, he jumped him, let's face it. Now, this wasn't a Troy Crowder, Bob Probert type of jump back at the Joe in their rematch, if you remember back in 1991, for the fight fan out there. But still, it wasn't really much of a scrap. Just like those scraps in the first seconds of the game, nothing really to write home about. It was exciting. There wasn't much buildup for this. But knowing that this took place brought you back to the time when hockey was hockey. And let's call it as we see it. So then now all of either hockey Twitter or people, fans who aren't really into the NHL, and Lord knows, I haven't been into the NHL for many years, and one of the reasons why is because they need to bring this back. And bottom line is I had no trust or no faith that there was going to be any retribution tonight. And surprisingly, you saw that within the first minute of the game. So now, for all those out there that are thinking, oh, this was a disgrace, oh, this is an embarrassment to the league, where's the embarrassment? If anything, the embarrassment was later on in the game when Pavel Buchnevich got thrown out of the game for a cross-check across the face. That's the problem with the sport. We don't need to have those type of cheap shots, those acts to go on where it ruins the sport And of course, you're already taking a tough guy out of the league because you wouldn't have that type of payback or you wouldn't have that type of retribution, as they say, when it comes to the regular player who couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And I get it, Butch Davis has gotten into a couple of scraps this year, but again, he's not going to be confused with Nick Fotiu. He's not going to be confused with Brandon Prust. He's not going to be confused with Darren Langdon, the tough guys that the Rangers passed. Sandy McCarthy. And it's one of those things where I get infuriated as a fan because when you look at the start of that game and you look at what happened, granted, I wasn't expecting that and it was a pleasant surprise, but at the same time, why is everybody in an uproar over it? Oh, it's a black eye, it's an embarrassment. No, it's not. Because you can fight in the sport. The bad part is that you don't have any tough guys in the sport that really brings the ferocity, the intimidation factor, the physicality of the game that we once saw. And I'm not going to go back into the history because that's a whole other separate issue. But the bottom line is that when we see what took place tonight and people are going to be throwing their hands up, oh, you see, this is why the NHL needs to get rid of fighting and so on and so forth, you just need to shut up and go sit somewhere else. Because until they abolish fighting altogether, and pretty much they have, even though the fights have been up a little bit this year, I guess you could say because of the way the divisions and the rivalries, whatever. But I'm glad it happened because it just shows that people can, or players can police themselves on the ice. Where Brandon Prust, he had an article in the Players Tribune, I'm going to get to him right now, where he said that, yes, this is where the players need to police themselves and you can't get rid of fighting in the sport. He's 1,000% right on that. But there's one problem with that statement. The true policeman, the true enforcer in the sport is pretty much an endangered species. You can count on one hand how many great tough guys there are in the National Hockey League. And sadly, because of the rules going back to the 04 season, and even before that, not to go through a whole history lesson with that, but there aren't any tough guys in this league. So a lot of the fights that you've seen this year and fighting has gone up, you haven't gotten many of the heavyweight variety. You haven't gotten anything close to what we've seen so many moons ago. And for people to come out today and think that, well, the NHL got what it deserved, or the NHL, here they go again, the black eye in the sport. No, it's not. It's just that you people aren't paying attention. Because hockey is and was a sport that was patrolled by men. Because anytime a player was going to get run on the ice, anytime there was going to be some sort of fisticuffs, there was always going to be not one, not two, sometimes three guys on each team. Go back to the Broad Street Bullies and the old Bruin teams. I'm going back to the 70s. But still. And I'm going to say this also. I said this many weeks ago when Tom Wilson got that suspension on Brandon Carlo. He's a guy that's going to throw his weight around. He's a big boy, 6'4", he can handle himself. But here's the thing. There are not many players like him in the league. So, of course, he's going to run people. He's going to push people to the ice. He's going to fight. He's going to do whatever it takes. Because there isn't a Bob Probert coming off that bench. There isn't a Joe Kosa coming off that bench. There isn't a Tony Twist coming off that bench. Ty Domi down the list. So, of course, he could get away with that. Because if this was the NHL of yesteryear, yeah, he could try doing that. But guess what? He would have to pay the piper. And he would pipe down with a lot of that extracurricular nonsense that happened on Monday night where he would really have a fair fight. Because let's face it, Brandon Smith, he's a willing guy. I get it. And he fights, whatever. He's not Dave Brown. If Dave Brown was on the ice tonight, you think Tom Wilson would have had a chance? This is why you need to have fighting in the league. And you need to have the tough guys in the league. Because without them, you get incidents that you got a couple of nights ago and you get Pavel Buchnevich later on with the cross-check. If he were to do that, Brown's going to go on the ice and he's going to make sure he crashes him into the boards. And then somebody else will come and fight for his battle because Buchnevich, he couldn't even, Dave Brown. So that's it. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm right at the 10-minute mark. And I'll close out by saying this. I have as many hits as Francisco Lindor over the last 24 at-bats. 0, and I don't even play. And with that being said, the JAYREELZ podcast, every Monday around 4 to 5 p.m., sometimes twice a week. Looking forward to getting that guest. Brandon Prust, come on. I'd love to have you on to talk about this. As always, people, appreciate the support, love, etc. Until next time, on the flip, baby.